God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods, simply to appear worthy of it?
There are images of one fighter who was so badly disfigured by this event, he was unrecognizable.
But I feel like I have to speak out on just how senseless and dangerous I feel like it is as a doctor.
This is clearly a concussion, and we should not be advocating for a sport that is based around concussions.
And if it's too gruesome and you don't like it, I got the solution for you. Don't watch it.
What is Power Slap?
Power Slap.
Power Slap is a sexy new combat sport for a sexy new decade. Contestants take turns delivering the hardest strike possible until man fall over. Bonus points are awarded if they fall over funny.
Power Slap.
Slap fighting as a sport has been around for some time now, garnering huge views on both YouTube and the Fifth Circle of Hell. Like the combat sports equivalent of the Habsburg jaw, slap fighting is an unnatural devolution of fighting enjoyed mostly by enthusiasts of inbreeding. If you could argue that crack cocaine is just a hyper-efficient version of caffeine, then slap fighting is an incredibly efficient way of seeing people get knocked out. So if all you care about in your combat sports is seeing someone have the memory of their grandparents shift deleted from their brain, slap fighting is the kind of time saver you're looking for. No longer do you have to worry about sitting through 3, 5, or God forbid 12 rounds of fighting in order to see a human being get permanent and irreversible brain damage. Almost every single slap fighting video practically guarantees you'll see a person get forcibly ejected from reality and spend the rest of their life wondering why they keep putting their cell phone in the fridge, and all in less time than it takes to cancel a Fight Pass subscription. If all of this sounds like something you'd be interested in, Dana White has you covered. While the majority of early slap fighting videos originated from relatively unknown Eastern European promotions and featured such combat sports luminaries as that guy with the synthol biceps and Slavic Frank Zappa, Dana realized that the best slap fighting begins at home. After a promotional tour in a Cabo nightclub on New Year's Eve, Dana launched his very own big-budget slap fighting league in America.
There's actually technique to this thing, believe it or not.
Power Slap was born.
Power Slap.
Power Slap may be the single worst idea from someone with more money than sense since Andrew Tate Instagrammed his lunch. But Dana's slap-based passion project isn't the first time someone with ties to the UFC has tried to reinvent MMA through a lens of unbridled idiocy.
I'm going under depression now.
Even the most talented artists are capable of producing masterworks of garbage. Every FromSoft has a Ninja Blade, every Francis Ford Coppola a Godfather 3, and every Metallica has an Everything They Did post and Justice for All.
Cool.
And for Art Davie, the man who co-created the UFC, there's X-Arm. It's the early 1990s. Hair metal is taking its dying breath, depression is going mainstream, and a Japanese promotion called Shuto was doing MMA before the term MMA had even been coined. But much like PlayStation 2 Brawler, Garuden, Breakblow, Fist or Twist, it was just a bit too niche for Western audiences at the time. Fortunately, former car salesman and devout hat wearer Art Davey had the solution. After an argument about whether boxing was better than wrestling ended with Davey being wrestle-humped by his friend, he spent the next years planning what would ultimately become the King of Iron Fist tournament, the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
I actually was a poor amateur boxer, and a friend brought a wrestler over to me back in '65 on the beach out in Hampton Bays, Long Island, and I got humbled by being taken down, and he put a hold on me, and I thought, we're about the same size. I couldn't land up. We were just, sparring, and it went south on me, and I never forgot that.
In 1993, with the help of Gracie family royalty Horry and Gracie, Davey co-created and co-produced UFC 1, and the rest is history. But in 2001, only 8 years into the lifespan of MMA, the UFC's parent company SEG was bankrupt. Davey decided this Ultimate Fighting thing was clearly just a fad, like a steroid-fueled fidget spinner. He sold his stake in the UFC for $2 million to Zuffa, turned his back on the sport he helped create, and unwittingly ushered in the era of Dana White. In the intervening years, Davey had to watch as his very own Frankenstein's monster evolved from a fringe spectacle of flying teeth and testicle pounding to the fastest growing sport in the world. The UFC went on to be more successful than Davey could ever have imagined, like an MMA Beyoncé to Davey's Rest of Destiny's Child. After 7 years on the outside looking in, a time which saw him unsuccessfully pitch ideas for new fight promotions to networks like Showtime, in 2008, Davey prodigal sonned his way back into the world of combat sports. He was approached by a TV production company in Seattle called Piranha Entertainment, and in what many experts agree may have possibly been a meth-induced fugue state, Piranha offered a blank check to Davey for use in creating an alternative to the UFC. Davey said, "Rather than trying to compete with the UFC, which I thought would take 100 million, I should go back to my greatest strength, which is creativity." After seeing what he would eventually create, I would say there's an argument to be made that Davey's choice in dapper headwear is a greater strength than his creativity. After a pitch meeting that one can only assume was so intoxicant-fueled that the breakout room was a vomitorium, Davey and the executives at Piranha settled on their idea for a new, extreme, UFC-beating combat sport. A combat sport for the digital age. A combat sport that didn't have all that boring ground fighting shit that the public hated. A combat sport that would make the gymnasticoid gods of ancient Greece weep tears of joy ever they gaze upon its countenance.
Well, Art, you are the godfather of the UFC, and now you've come up with what I believe to be possibly something that may top that X-Arm.
Can I laugh in your face?
That sport was WTF. World Tethered Fighting. But then they realised what most people associate the acronym WTF with and changed the name to X-Arm, Extreme Arm Wrestling.
X-Arm is a brand new combat sport, and it combines the best of hardcore arm wrestling, kickboxing, and jiu-jitsu.
Combining any combat sport with hardcore arm wrestling is a bit like combining Meshuggah's bleed with your sex mix. Shit is about to get real weird real fast, and at least one person will be scarred for life. Davey teamed up with Todd Williams, owner of an MMA promotion called Gladiator Challenge. Gladiator Challenge has been around since 1999, and yet somehow still hasn't figured out this whole YouTube thumbnail lark. Together, they set up what they called an idea lab, where Williams supplied the fighters and Davey supplied the worst ideas for a sporting mashup since Slam Ball. Composing the extreme part of extreme arm wrestling, fighters were tethered to a table, their wrists bound by duct tape, and over 3 one-minute rounds were allowed kick, punch, and attack submissions at will. Or they could, try and pin their opponent's arm like in traditional arm wrestling. but once people started punching across the table like an argument over who's paying for dinner got out of hand, the arm wrestling portion of X-Arm was largely forgotten.
Yeah, I see some battle wounds and some bruises. That's great.
Very few X-Arm videos exist today, but of what remains, roughly 0 fights are actually won via a traditional arm wrestling pin, while the rest are won via frantically winging haymakers over a table. X-Arm was labelled by Davey as the roughest 3 minutes in sport, a title that nowadays belongs to the final 3 minutes of Shevchenko vs Grasso. Unsurprisingly, X-Arm was a staggering failure. Nobody was clamouring for a sport that looked like the answer to the question, what happens if the Quiznos cashier I'm about to rob puts up a fight? And the MMA media at the time were scathing in their appraisal. X-Arm had a shorter lifespan than a low-effort TikTok and was cancelled after 1 season.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
But Davey wasn't done trying to make X-Arm happen, and credit where it's due, for everything X-Arm did wrong, which was basically everything, it did get some things right. Davey was focused on making X-Arm a sport for the digital age, which was pretty forward thinking for 2008. The narrow viewing space required by 2 men tied to a table meant X-Arm was perfect for being watched on a phone. And when Davey relaunched X-Arm in 2012, he partnered with former YouTube behemoth Machinima. With 12 million subscribers, Machinima were the Walt Whitmans of 360 no-scope COD videos. Machinima would stream episodes of the new and improved X-Arm Season 2, and presumably would upload bro-step powered headshot montages from X-Arm FU, the official X-Arm mobile game.
Pin! He's going for the pin! He is pinned!
You'd think with such a YouTube titan to piggyback off, there would be dozens of X-Arm videos still out there for us to have a good chuckle at. But Machinima was a glorified pyramid scheme. Creators submitted videos, while Machinima made all the money from the views and shared only pennies with the original creators. Once monetization and ad revenue became available to everyone with over 1,000 subscribers, the Machinima pyramid was inverted and placed them right on the bottom. After years of allegations of ripping off creators, Machinima eventually dim-macked their own channel, deleting every single video along with X-Arm Season 2's entire catalogue. Barely a year into its relaunch, X-Arm was killed off, this time for good. There were no official announcements or press conferences. X-Arm simply ceased to be. The final social media post by X-Arm was from May 1st, 2013, a post that simply reads, X-Arm gets great response at MIP TV in Cannes. 11 people have liked that post in the intervening decade. Facebook user Kenny McLaren exclaimed, "That's awesome, when is the next event? Can't wait to be part of it." Kenny is still waiting for his answer. X-Arm was a terrible idea, but it had its fans, such as this rando blog post from strengthfighter.com. Many people says it's shit, but I say it's great. So fuck the haters and keep going. But unfortunately, I'm not in the majority and the masses don't think like me. So this exciting sport isn't about to tuck off. I'm not sure if Strength Fighter realised when he wrote this post in 2014 that X-Arm had already been dead for over a year. Art Davey hasn't created any UFC-beating combat sports since then. His most recent involvement with combat sports was being inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. As for the fighters themselves, very little information exists about any of the competitors. The only competitor with any name recognition was former Pride and UFC legend Gary Goodridge, but no footage of him competing in X-Arm exists. Of the remaining cast members, only Homer Moore and Rick Vardell are of any note, and for all the wrong reasons. Before becoming X-Arm heavyweight champion, Homer Moore was an MMA fighter who had fought and lost to a pre-UFC Chael Sonnen in MMA promotion Rumble on the Rock. He eventually made it to the UFC, where he had one fight, a submission loss to Evan Tanner at UFC 34. But behind the scenes, Moore had gained a bad reputation for bragging about having gang affiliations and was known as a guy to be avoided.
You always heard these rumors about, hey, be careful. Guy runs with a bad crowd, that's a rough guy. Stay away from Homer.
In 2013, he was arrested for suspicion of first-degree murder in a cold case dating back to 1999. 19-year-old Karam Hussein Jabbar was found dead in the trunk of a car in Tempe, Arizona, the victim of a drug deal gone wrong, and Moore was the prime suspect. The charges were eventually dropped, citing a lack of evidence, but not before Moore had spent 2 years in jail for a crime he didn't commit. But while he was released and had his conviction overturned, Moore allegedly admitted to the killing later on to UFC veteran Joe Riggs.
Homer choked him from behind, choked him and killed him. Put it in, and they didn't. And he was in jail for 3 years, just like 5 years ago for this, and they let him out, lack of evidence. And because he admitted this to me later on in life, you know. I mean, he was really paranoid. He was like whispering, and he told me exactly how it happened. So I called the police and like, hey, I'll testify. He straight told me this, and I don't know for what happened. They dropped it and let him go. It was fucking nuts.
Fellow heavyweight Rick Vardell fared almost as badly as Moore. Vardell, most famous for owning the second worst t-shirt in MMA history, was arrested in 2019 for selling opioids. As recently as January of 2023, Vardell was arrested again, this time for pleading guilty to possession of a firearm in furtherance of a drug trafficking offence. Watching X-Arm today, I can't help but feel it really was ahead of its time, and that maybe there is a market for hardcore arm wrestling. It's not good, but it has the minimum criteria to at least be stupidly entertaining, the kind of hilariously crap freak show that would go viral if it was staged by Fight Circus or Epic FC. Watching X-Arm today, some of the knockouts are the kind of thing that would be devoured whole by TikTok's algorithm.
Pin! He's going for the pin! He is pinned!
But before we move on from X-Arm, I'd like to make a plea to Art Davey. Art, if you're watching this, and you're still looking for new combat sports ideas, I think I may have just found your UFC beating billion-dollar idea. Remember that random blog post from strengthfighter.com that I mentioned earlier? Well, it turns out Strengthfighter is somewhat of a combat sports visionary, and since 2016 has been diligently working on creating the single greatest combat sport known to man. Slaughter Sport.
Slaughter Sport.
Slaughter Sport is a no-holds-barred, no weight classes, no drug testing, no government legislation, 48-man, year-long tournament that for some reason also specifies that it has no dress code, in which case I choose to fight in full Steven Seagal cosplay.
Slaughter Sport.
Fights can only be stopped by KO, submission, or death. Strengthfighter even has mock-ups of what the overall winner of such a tournament would look like. Here we see the WGF champion, a veritable gold-encrusted demigod who took this whole no dress code thing and fucking sprinted with it. Pictured here beaming proudly shortly after beating 47 other men into a living death. Considering the casual homophobia in the description of Slaughter Sport, I'm pretty sure the irony of this guy looking like MMA's very own Liberace was completely lost on Strengthfighter.
Slaughter Sport.
Here we see struggling underdog Davy Mac Kidd, who is apparently from Ireland, yet I've never met or heard of him. Davy Mac appears to be both a lover and a fighter, his salacious grin and unctuously raised eyebrow practically demanding, "Meet me in the men's room." Davy, make Slaughter Sport happen. If you could list the most extreme places in which to have a fight, ranked from least extreme to most extreme, the top 3 would likely be Kimbo Slice's backyard, a 1990s video game advert, and at number 1, The Pit.
Yeah, I think it's cool to talk about The Pit.
There's something about the allure of The Pit that has made it a constant in combat sports lore over the years. From Jean-Claude Van Damme fighting the lead singer of Manowar in a semi-drained swimming pool, to complete dog-shit arcade games like Pit Fighter, doing anything in a pit instantly makes it extreme. Fighters from Chuck Liddell to Tank Abbott have described themselves as pit fighters, but in Chuck's case, that's because he fought out of a gym called The Pit, which sources have confirmed was absolutely located above ground. It's unknown if Tank Abbott ever had any subterranean shenanigans to warrant his title of pit fighter, but I mean, look at the guy. He once fought a man known only as Cabbage.
The original bad boy against a man known only as Cabbage.
If anyone's fighting in a hole in the ground, it's Tank. The term pit fighter has its roots much farther back in time than bad one-on-one fighting games and Van Damme movies. Pit fighting originated as a pastime for Welsh coal miners in the early 1900s. Life in the mine was nasty, brutish and short. Underground explosions and ceiling collapses were just two of the myriad ways of dying on the job that miners ran the risk of every day. Tommy Farr, a miner who began working in the pits aged 12, went on to become a professional boxer who once fought Joe Louis. He also left us numerous tales of the origin of pit fighting. According to Farr, miners essentially invented fighting in a phone booth before the invention of phone booths. As a form of entertainment in between shifts, miners would dig a pair of waist-deep pits approximately 2 feet apart. One man would enter each pit, where they would proceed to swing at each other until someone's brain entered power-saving mode. As was the style at the time, if you have to play live-action Rock'em Sock'em Robots on your lunch break, in order to take your mind off the fact that you'll probably die on the job, it might be time to call HR. But why are we discussing pit fighting in a supposed video about slap fighting?
This is what I do, my friend.
Because in 2008, another man who was heavily involved in the creation of the UFC, Bob Meyerowitz, attempted to reinvent combat sports much in the same way Art Davie had with X-Arm.
Meyerowitz is obviously a pioneer in this sport, talking about now this YAMMA pit fighting, and it's kind of interesting. He's going old school, maybe with the whole pit and with the main attraction as well, bringing in some of the early stars in Ultimate Fight.
But rather than come up with a concept like extreme rock, paper, scissors or whatever, Meyerowitz proved time as a linear construct is a flawed concept, as what was old once became new again, when he created a brand new MMA organization, one that would revolutionize the game by eliminating boring wall and stall fights and force non-stop action by turning the fighting surface from a flat octagon into a vaguely bowl-shaped pit. YAMMA Pit Fighting was born. And if you thought the mid-2000s era UFC was edgier than Andrew Tate giving a lecture on modern-day feminism at the cliffs of Moher, well then strap yourself in, kid, because YAMMA wasn't fucking around.
YAMMA Pit Fighting. On the street, it's against the law. In the pit, it is the law.
According to Meyerowitz, YAMMA is Russian for pit.
YAMMA is a word that in Russian means a pit in the ground.
Pit. YAMMA.
And Seagal is actually Russian for dickhead.
Dickhead. Seagal.
Hey, why don't you guys speak English?
And while I can't verify the accuracy of either translation, it does mean that Meyerowitz thought it was a-okay to create a promotion whose name would translate to Pit Fighting. The most redundant title since 1966's cult horror movie Manos, The Hands of Fate. And if you're not up to speed on your Spanish, that translates to Hands, The Hands of Fate. Manos is rated as one of the single worst movies of all time, a zero-budget, zero-effort Brendan Schaub of a movie that garnered a cult following simply because of its stunning ineptitude. And YAMMA Pit Fighting, with its equally redundant title, would share a similar fate. Meyerowitz was the owner of Semaphore Entertainment Group, the company that produced every UFC pay-per-view from its inception until the company was sold to the Fertittas in 2001. And much like Davey, after selling the entire company for the same price as one Bugatti Veyron, had to sit and watch as the company exploded in popularity and shaped the landscape of combat sports in the 2010s. YAMMA Pit Fighting was Meyerowitz's attempt to become relevant in the burgeoning mixed martial arts scene once again. Meyerowitz and Davey had one thing in common. They were convinced the public hated the ground aspect of MMA and were determined to reinvent it in such a way that fights never hit the mat, because apparently they both forgot that kickboxing is a thing. Davey attempted to achieve this non-stop action by chaining his fighters to a table, and Meyerowitz by sloping the sides of the octagon so that fighters would, in theory, naturally be forced to stand in the center of the ring. Not content with invoking the brutal spectre of pit fighting, YAMMA wanted to appeal to the just bleed guy at the core of our sleeping lizard brains by making the entire event an 8-man, one-night elimination tournament. YAMMA was essentially a pit fighting kumite, which, now that I say it out loud, sounds like the kind of thing Frank Dukes needs to mentally conjure in order to achieve orgasm. But on April 11th, 2008, YAMMA made the worst debut since World War I. Behind the scenes, YAMMA was collapsing like an IKEA bookshelf made by someone with ADHD. The big names promised in the YAMMA Masters division were pulling out faster than a devout Catholic. Gary Goodridge was set to face Butterbean, who you may recognise as that guy that Minowa Man hit with 2 flying dropkicks. But 2 weeks before YAMMA was due to air, Goodridge had been knocked out while fighting in South Korea. With such a recent concussion, the New Jersey Athletic Commission wouldn't clear him to fight. In the other Masters Division fight, Oleg Taktarov was set to face the Master Champion of Mixed Martial Arts, Don Fry.
I'm Don Fry, the Master Champion of Mixed Martial Arts. I'm back because you asked for it. YAMMA Pit Fighting. Oleg Taktarov? Who is this yahoo? Listen, took you half hour to beat Tank Abbott. Took me a minute and a half. Go get your bread line, suck up some vodka, smoke stupid sexy. Right.
But Fry pulled out due to a shoulder injury, which was probably for the best, as by 2008, Don's prime was about 6 years prior. UFC veteran Pat Smith was called in as his replacement, an arrangement that was more short-lived than the Machida era, after he was arrested for possession and speeding. Morris Smith would replace Pat Smith, but it doesn't take fucking Rain Man to spot the pattern here, and you've probably already figured out that almost as soon as he had signed the contract, Smith decided, fuck it anyway, and dropped out of the tournament. With Fight Night rapidly approaching, YAMMA still had no one to face Taktarov in their marquee Masters Division fight. You've all seen this clip by now. I pretty much based my entire career around the philosophy of this man, but as the tendons in his neck reach a level of tensile strength comparable to the suspender cables of the Golden Gate Bridge, and his primal scream echoes into eternity, the camera cuts away to this man. This is Mark Kerr, one of the most impressive physical specimens to ever inject a shitload of steroids. Like a proto-Overeem or a beta Brock Lesnar, Kerr was the poster boy for performance enhancers in the late 90s. A veteran of pride in the UFC, known for his explosive wrestling and impressive use of headbutts, Kerr was one of the early stars of the no-holds-barred era of MMA. If the phrase gentle giant can ever be applied to a man who is famous for his headbutt game, it's Mark Kerr. Outside the ring, he was a softly spoken, intelligent and caring man. This was perhaps to his detriment, as noted by his friend and mentor Mark Coleman. No matter how many times he fought, Kerr was always scared by the prospect of fighting.
Before I fought Paul Arnold, I remember taking about this much of a sip of water, like in a Dixie cup, and like walking around and going, just heaving this little smidgen of water up that I had just taken in. My stomach, I couldn't hold anything down. At that point, I'm talking to myself and I'm going, you know, I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm fucking doing this.
But by 2008, the days in which Kerr was known as the Smashing Machine were long gone. The years of fighting and the toll it had taken on his body and mind had led to a crippling addiction to painkillers.
You know, benzodiazepines, you know, Percocets, Darvocets, and then you start getting the liquid injectable stuff, you know. You can get Dilaudid, you can get morphine, you can get Nubain, you know, and they're all opiates.
In October of 1999, only 2 years after this clip was taken, this titan of a man, an impervious colossus who seemed like the only thing that could stop him was an intervention from the United Nations, this superhuman was almost killed by a very human condition, addiction. Kerr overdosed on painkillers. His condition was serious. He was unable to stay conscious for longer than 30 seconds, and on the ambulance trip to the hospital, he identified the current US president as Ronald Reagan. Doctors were unsure if he would survive.
If this doesn't fucking shake you up, man, I don't know what's gonna. And if you don't fucking get some help, you're not gonna see the new year, man. You're not gonna make it. And it hurts for me to say that to you. But whatever it takes, man, we're here, you know?
But Kerr did survive, and after attending rehab, he attempted to get his career back on track, but the losses kept piling up. Between 1999 and his retirement in 2009, he had 12 losses and only 2 wins. His once imposing physique melted away, and the writing was on the wall for his career. As he eventually will for all of us, Father Time had come to claim his due. All of which meant he was a perfect candidate to fight Takhtarov in the inaugural YAMMA Masters division.
On the street, it's against the law. In the pit, it is the law.
Despite suffering more dropouts than an English lit class taught by Tito Ortiz, YAMMA managed to limp across the finish line and had their debut and finale all at the same time on April 11th, 2008. Pat Smith was able to clear up his legal issues and was announced as Butterbean's new opponent. Takhtarov versus Kerr was locked in. They even managed to get former UFC heavyweight Rico Rodriguez on board, fresh off his stint in celebrity rehab with Dr. Drew. So while things weren't exactly looking up for YAMMA, they were at least looking horizontally. But YAMMA seemed to attract disaster like a female Twitch streamer attracts incels. In an attempt to force some kind of sanity on this pit-fighting kumite, the New Jersey State Athletic Commission had stipulated that the only way they would allow fighters to potentially fight 3 times in one night is if the first 2 fights consisted of a single 5-minute round. While the YAMMA pit was intended to funnel fighters into the center of the ring like a garbage disposal of violence, the majority of the card was stacked with wrestlers. Wrestlers who very quickly discovered that the lip of the YAMMA pit made for an easy takedown. In an attempt to eliminate boring wrestle-hump fights, YAMMA had actually increased the possibility of turning every single match into a boring wrestle-hump. And with the potential of fighting 3 times in a night, most fighters were content to take their opponent down on the lip of the cage and hold them there, while trying to avoid damage so they could be fresh for a second or third fight. Ultimately, 7 of the evening's 11 fights were won by decision after a single 5-minute round. The sole 3-round fight of the night was the finale between Travis this guy and Chris Tucherer, oh for fuck's sake. In the few rare instances of a fight being finished by stoppage, Mark Kerr tapped out for the first time in his entire career to a knee bar by Takhtarov. Butterbean was brutally TKO'd by Pat Smith, and UFC veteran Alexei Oleinik finished some guy with his trademark move, the Ezekiel choke. But the most memorable part of YAMMA wasn't the fighting, for obvious reasons, but rather the announcing. While they tried to invoke the spirit of the early UFCs by hiring former UFC commentators Bruce Beck and Jeff Blatnick, former UFC ring announcer and Half-Life enjoyer Rich the G-Man Goins was busy arranging his oversized suit collection that weekend. So instead, YAMMA hired radio personality Scott Farrell. As someone who has been accused of having a weird voice, I feel it would be hypocritical of me to comment on Farrell's voice work, but you know what, fuck it. Farrell delivered every line in a voice so gravelly it sounded like he was deep-throating the rock monster from the Neverending Story.
Ladies and gentlemen in the house and on pay-per-view, welcome to the beautiful Mark Estes.
I'm not sure if Farrell is the worst announcer of all time, or if he was actually an undercover agent sent by Dana to make sure this YAMMA thing crashed and burned.
Standing at a rugged 6'1", 220. You do not want to mess with this man. Moving his MMA record to 49 wins, 11 losses with no draws, 2 victories apiece for these badasses and warriors ready for the heavyweight title and grabbing that strap on and getting it on all night long.
Farrell treated his cue cards more like a suggestion than an instruction, going off script and giving some of the worst improvisation since the invention of the roadside bomb.
In charge of the leverage tonight in the YAMMA Pit, once again, Big Dan the Man. How can I be the man if you're the man, Dan? Magliotta.
Farrell gave rambling, excruciating introductions for fighters and criminal misuse of a catchphrase.
Are you ready to shake it? Ooh. What the hell is that?
YAMMA was deservedly a failure. Between a lineup of fighters so far past their prime they'd have to do a 23andMe to try and find their connection to it, the ridiculous single round fight structure, a revolutionary fight surface that ultimately made the majority of fights worse, and a ring announcer with the perfect voice for silent movies, YAMMA was a Titanic just waiting for its iceberg to show up. They never held a second event, and Meyerowitz hasn't touched the world of MMA since. If X-Arm and YAMMA were slightly misguided attempts at cashing in on the popularity of MMA by the former creators of the UFC, then Power Slap is a dangerous cash grab by a company that has already grabbed literally all the cash and is more misguided than the fucking Donner Party. Power Slap exists for the sole reason that Dana White, already a billionaire, saw the popularity of slap fighting videos on YouTube and decided he needed to corner the market on what is essentially a coin flip where the consolation prize is brain damage. Slap fighting isn't a new spectacle. One of the earliest references to slap fighting that I can find is in this Fox Sports advert from 2006. In the advert, slap fighting is treated as a joke, the punchline being nobody outside of Siberian mining towns populated by alcoholics should give a shit about slap fighting. You know, hilarious Fox Sports stuff like that. The comments on the YouTube upload of this advert are full of people having a really good laugh at the very notion that such a ludicrous idea for a sport could ever become a reality. But all things truly wicked start from innocence. While it can be hard to pinpoint the nexus of slap fighting, there is no UFC 1 of slapping that can be labelled as this is where it all began. Most people assume it originated in Russia, but the earliest slap fighting footage that I could find, much to the chagrin of Fox Sports' advertising department, appears to originate in the good old US of A. In the mid-2000s, radio station Hot 97 hosted Smackfest, a slap fighting competition for a prize of $5,000. The event was shut down by the New York State Athletic Commission after it was deemed as illegal boxing. A tattooing convention called Ink Masters has been hosting what they called slap-offs for over 8 years now. Siberian Power Show, the event that hosted one of the first viral slap fighting videos, even claimed that they were inspired by Ink Master's slap-offs. From that same era, we also have Bitch Slap Thursdays, a slap fighting event held in a Memphis strip club. But slap fighting is a bit like COVID. It thrived during the lockdowns of 2020, and arguing over where exactly it originated was kind of pointless once people started dying. The first recorded death from slap fighting happened in Poland on October 22nd, 2021 at the Punchdown Gala promotion. A 46-year-old bodybuilder named Artur Walczak was hospitalized after being slapped unconscious. He was placed into a medically induced coma, but died several weeks later on November 26th. The cause of death was listed as multi-organ failure resulting from irreversible damage to the central nervous system. There is no 100% safe way to compete or train in a full contact combat sport. If you're taking punches, kicks, or submission holds, you will accrue damage over time, but damage can be mitigated. Fighters can roll with the punches or employ different defensive styles. Boxers, for example, can use the Philly shell, peekaboo, or shoulder roll as a defense. The beauty of combat sports is in the hitting and not getting hit. Defense in slap fighting tends to be frowned upon. Even slightly flinching before a strike lands is counted as a foul. A good defense in slap fighting is to offer up a silent prayer to the deity of your choice, as a guy whose biggest competitive achievement in life was eating the entire menu at a TGI Fridays wings an open palm haymaker to the side of your skull. And make no mistake, these are haymakers. People might assume a slap is something that hurts your pride more than it does your face, but that is not the case with slap fighting. If we can compare slaps, here we see a traditional slap. Dana leads with the fingers in a short, sharp slapping motion with no wind-up. There's very little technique, and overall it seems more designed to humiliate rather than physically hurt. Slap fighters tend to lead with the hard part of the base of the palm with a major wind-up. It is effectively an open palm haymaker of the variety Bas Rutten was famous for using to knock out opponents in pancrase. In late 2021, YouTube made the decision to remove the dislike button from videos, in a move which was, ironically, almost universally disliked. In January 2023, Dana held a press conference to announce the formation of the Power Slap League and became possibly the biggest beneficiary of the removal of dislikes. Had that button been available, videos uploaded by Dana's great-great-grandchildren in the year 2090 would probably receive residual dislikes from the Power Slap press conference. The announcement of Power Slap was received with the kind of grace and tact that the internet is famous for. Did Dana think before he decided to go through with this? Every famous entertainment promoter needs their own XFL phase. LMAO, CTE, guaranteed. What's that? Dana White being shady as hell and not caring about people's health? Looking forward to Dana's next venture, Kicking Nuts Championship. If my future kids grow up wanting to be a slap champion, I'll never forgive Dana. This feels like the XFL. Next UFC venture will be thumb wrestling. Dana's wife gets the rematch she deserves. Brain Damage Olympics. This is like if a car racing promoter started the Head-On Collision Championship. Most important thing is their health and safety. Crying, laughing emoji, thumbs up emoji. Never one to be deterred by haters, trolls, common sense, ethics, morals, or very publicly being caught slapping his own wife, Dana forged ahead with Power Slap. In the mid-2000s, The Ultimate Fighter changed the fortunes of the UFC.
Yeah!
The TUF Season 1 finale hosted arguably the single most important fight in MMA history, Griffin vs. Bonner. It was the UFC's first viral moment, and almost overnight, they went from the verge of bankruptcy to the fastest growing sport in the world. But TUF wasn't just about the fights. The reality TV nature of the show helped the public to see MMA fighters in a new light. long assumed to be tap-out wearing barbarians by comparison to the heroic boxer archetype established by decades of Rocky movies, Tough won hearts and minds by showing the public that MMA fighters were skilled, dedicated, and hard-working regular guys. Power Slap, Road to the Title, is the UFC's attempt to Trojan horse slap fighting into popular culture in the same way Tough did for MMA. It is a reality TV series consisting of 8 one-hour-long episodes, and in Dana's attempt to crop dust Power Slap into popular consciousness, it aired on Fight Pass, YouTube, and cable television network TBS. There are a few important distinctions to make between The Ultimate Fighter and Power Slap. First and foremost, after 8 seasons of Tough, the showrunners realised that stocking the house with unlimited free booze made for dramatic TV, but also made the contestants look like a bunch of violent drunks.
Let me bang, man!
I want to do that, man.
Let me
I do.
Almost every season contained at least one drunk episode, where one or more fighters would get completely plastered and brawl in the house. Dana would arrive to give his "Do you want to be a fucking fighter" speech, or if that wasn't stern enough, would call the contestants,
You're a drunken retard too, you know what I mean?
And someone would get sent home. It wasn't a good look for supposed professional martial artists to be completely rat-arsed in every other episode, and it wasn't a good look that the UFC were exploiting contestants with admitted drinking problems to boost ratings.
Do you have a drinking problem?
Yeah.
You do?
It took until 2017 for the UFC to realise that free alcohol and a house filled with more testosterone than Alistair Overeem's medicine cabinet weren't a good combination. In an effort to make the show and its contestants appear more professional, focused and disciplined, from season 25 onwards, booze was banned. By contrast, the Slap House is stocked like a Dublin brewery the day before Paddy's Day.
Oh, we getting ratchet, I'm telling you right now.
In episode 2, as the Slappers enter the house, front and centre in some of the most egregious product placement since Tough Season 2,
I'm so glad you used your right guard.
is a bottle of that shit banana flavoured whiskey that's plastered all over the octagon. A more conspiratorially minded person might assume that the UFC know that the only reason people watch slap fighting is to see people get slapped unconscious, and to pad out the runtime of an hour-long episode, they need the contestants to get drunk and start interpersonal drama.
There, all hell broke loose.
Hey!
I was just holding him, and I was like, just chill out, man.
Just hush.
Blew my whole lip off my face.
The difference in training regimens between shows too is honestly laughable. Bruce Lee once said, "I don't fear the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." After watching the slap fight training montages of people throwing the same one strike over and over, I think Bruce may have been overthinking it. While Tough contestants spend their days at the gym kickboxing and grappling, slap fighters seem to spend the days measuring their neck strength and slapping a pad.
There's actually technique to this thing, believe it or not.
Can I laugh in your face?
There is no sparring because sparring and fighting are the exact same thing in this world. As a combat sports fan, Road to the Title is incredibly boring. As a fan of entertainment in general, it's worse than sitting through a Shaw comedy marathon, and overall it's the kind of programming I genuinely feel shaved double-digit points off my IQ. A more serious point of distinction to make is that while there are countless amateur and pro MMA fighters all over the world who would clamour for a spot on The Ultimate Fighter, seeing it as a golden ticket opportunity, the same cannot be said for the Slap House. There is a limited pool of fighters willing to compete in slap fighting. The kind of people who train for years to compete in MMA aren't likely to be swayed by the allure of slapping. JT Tilley, the owner of Slap Fight Championship, one of the biggest US slap fighting promotions, admitted as such in an interview with The New Yorker, stating that when SFC started up, They couldn't afford to turn away any potential contestants, anyone walking in off the street, as long as they passed a medical and appeared sober, could be a slap fighter. And this is reflected in the cast of Power Slap. Within the opening minutes of episode 2, when we get to know these people, there are tales of familial breakups, addiction, bankruptcy, and last chances.
I even fought to be clean for a year and a half, bro.
And while you get similar stories in the Tough House, these feel different. While there are a couple of people in the house who claim an amateur MMA or kickboxing background, the vast majority aren't professional athletes who have dedicated their lives to training.
What do you do for fun, John?
Dude, I don't do for fun. I smoke weed and hang out with my son.
They are mostly lost or broken people from towns you've never heard of before. Fathers who have lost custody of their kids, recovering addicts, society's great forgotten.
I've always been scapegoated as a bad boy, alcoholic, party animal.
It all adds to the overall exploitative vibe of Power Slap. These are people with little to no other options, who have been sold a lie that becoming the Power Slap champion will change their lives. But with purses for competitors rumoured to be $2,000 to show and $2,000 to win, you could change your life to a similar degree by getting a job at 7-Eleven. The only way Power Slap will change anyone's life is in the worst way imaginable. We can't talk about Power Slap without bringing up the most uncomfortable aspect of combat sports in general, and that's our love of knockouts and the shadow they cast on fighters' long-term brain health and quality of life. Knockouts are the single most prized way to win a fight. Exalted above all other methods of winning, knockouts are what fighters chase in every bout and what fans offer up to the content gods in the form of tweets, GIFs and compilation videos. A good knockout can send a fighter from relative obscurity to virality in a way that a decision or submission win cannot. But our love of knockouts comes with an extortionate price tag. Gary Goodridge is a fighter who has been mentioned several times in this video by now. He was listed as an X-Arm competitor, and we last saw him getting knocked out in South Korea and being forced to pull out of YAMMA. After that loss, he fought on for 2 more years, fighting 6 times and getting knocked out in 3 of them. Goodridge is a breed of fighter from the oldest of the old school, a veteran of K1, Pride, Vale Tudo and the UFC who started fighting back in 1996. Goodridge was the type of fighter who was known for either brutally KOing someone or getting brutally KO'd.
My style was, I'm gonna knock you out or you're gonna knock me out. That's it.
He was one of the biggest names of the early 2000s MMA scene. Goodridge also has been diagnosed with CTE as a result of his fighting career.
My coach, he told me, Gary, I can't come with you because I can't afford it, but after the fight, right after the fight, I want you to call me. After the fight, the only thing I could remember is I gotta call Norm, I gotta call Norm, I gotta call Norm. My brain didn't know anything else. I didn't know where I was, what I was doing. The only thing I remember is I gotta call Norm, I gotta call Norm. So I told everybody I gotta call Norm. I told everybody who was listening, I gotta call Norm, I gotta call Norm. And we went to the phone and I called Norm. He said, how you doing? I said, I don't know. He said, did you win? I said, win what? You fought, did you win? He said, put somebody else on the phone. And, sorry. And I put somebody else on the phone and that's when he decided, that's when he said, he told him to take him to the hospital. And, oh, sorry, I'm a little emotional because this guy's, that's when nobody around me knew that I was messed up.
Unfortunately for fans and fighters alike, combat sports and brain trauma will forever be inextricably linked. But with slap fighting, that link is stronger than the foundations of the earth. In an interview with the AP, Chris Nowinski, CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, said, "You can slip boxing punches, but in slap fighting, you're taking out everything that's interesting to watch and everything sporting from boxing and just doing the brain damage part. While knockouts are prized in MMA, they aren't the end-all be-all. If you look at a fight such as Chimaev versus Holland, here we have a fight that was incredible to watch, where barely a single strike was thrown. MMA fights can be won in any number of different ways, not requiring strikes to the head. But the outrage over slap fighting stems from the fact that it is a sport that is based around one thing and one thing only: knockouts, and by extension, brain trauma.
So we're gonna go ahead and roll you to sit on your butt right now. Dr. D is next to you. I got the doctor next to you. You got knocked out, okay?
Knocked out doing what? Was that fighting?
You're in the slap of it.
As part of my research for this video, I didn't want to just blindly accuse Power Slap of being needlessly dangerous without getting a professional opinion first. I consulted Dr. RichHilsden of the YouTube channel Knife Skills, a trauma surgeon and combat sports fan. Dr. Hilsden was kind enough to give me his time to discuss CTE, Power Slap, and its inherent dangers compared to other combat sports.
The competition is who can handle an injury more than others. So, you know, if you were to take that, and I made this comment in the video, if you were to take any other sport where it was based on injuring someone and you could visibly see the injury, you would never get that on the air. We've known for a long time that anyone who gets knocked unconscious has had a permanent change to the brain. That's not a new thing. That's right. That has been known for a long time. The question then is, you know, what are the effects of that? And of course, cumulative concussions over time lead to these longer term symptoms. And you've talked a little bit about, again, CTE. There's like major personality changes, mood changes, suicidality, memory loss, concentration problems. This is a sport that, with enough time in it, will have permanent repercussions for an athlete. There's definitely an endpoint here.
Doctors in general are aghast at the idea of slap fighting.
A lot of the medical boards that are involved in combat sports are upset. They did not think that the Nevada State Athletic Commission should approve this. Some of the biggest names in combat sports fighting in terms of fighter health, trying to promote awareness about brain injuries, were very, very strongly against this getting approved because, again, in their mind, like I'm saying here, this is just trading concussive blow for concussive blow.
But it's not just doctors, fans, and even US Congress that have been critical of this stuff. Fighters aren't exactly fans either.
Basically, two guys just taking free swings at one another. Like it's CTE for money. Like they're trading brain cells for cash. And they're only offering you a couple of $1,000s to do it anyway. It's not like it's going to change your life. I mean, change your life for the negative, of course. Be drinking out, eating soup for the rest of your life, doing that kind of stuff. It misses the point of combat sports. It's not a sport because there's not a competitiveness to it. It's the person that can get up after taking full power slaps. That in my eyes is ridiculous.
Fighters can and do die in both boxing and MMA. And now someone has died in slap fighting, with the rules of Power Slap being that if you can get up within 30 seconds of being slapped unconscious, then you're good to take another hit. It's only a matter of time before Power Slap changes someone's life in much the same way as it did for Arthur Walczak. But when the prognosis for contestants is a lifetime of mood swings, depression, amnesia, and a spiraling cognitive decline, it's genuinely hard to pick which outcome is worse. Shortly after Power Slap Season 1 aired, Stephen Klubeck, chairman of the Nevada State Athletic Commission, spoke on his decision to approve slap fighting in Nevada and said, "I made a mistake. I'm not happy about it." Power Slap's broadcasting partner TBS felt similarly, and Power Slap wasn't renewed for a second season. Even looking at the view count on YouTube, while they start strong, views drop hard after episode 2. There's a slight bump for the last 2 episodes, but if your big budget slap fighting show is getting less views than some of my videos, you may want to rethink things. Its ratings on TBS were even worse. Its debut was the 45th rated show on the network, but its finale was the 108th rated show. Dana announced that Power Slap is now airing exclusively on YouTube alternative Rumble. And calling Rumble a YouTube alternative is a bit like calling paranoid schizophrenia a reality alternative. Rumble has a fraction of YouTube's user base, that fraction being about 1%. Power Slap's view counts on Rumble are, in a word, abysmal. In 2 words, fucking abysmal. Rumble itself is somewhat controversial. It's home to die-hard QAnon adherents, conspiracy theorists, and other assorted red pill channels that were banned from YouTube. As such, it doesn't have the greatest reputation. Sure, you may find harmless channels like Lo-Fi Girl streaming her hip-hop beats to study or chill to over there, but you're also going to be bombarded by all manner of gobshites telling you not to drink Bud Light because a trans woman enjoyed it one time, when the real reason you shouldn't drink Bud Light is because it's Bud Light. The UFC promoting their new show exclusively alongside 10-hour-long QAnon rants doesn't exactly scream success. Hated by doctors and fighters alike, and ignored by existing MMA and boxing fans, hauled in front of Congress to explain itself, it's hard to tell where Power Slap goes from here. Dana is convinced Power Slap is simply in its Wild West era. Similar to the UFC in the mid-90s, the UFC was eventually accepted into the mainstream, albeit with all the cool shit like headbutts and dick punches removed, and maybe that is the case with Power Slap. Maybe one day it'll be accepted, and even overtake the UFC in popularity, but the key difference here is the success of MMA was built off the backs of martial arts fans. There was an audience for MMA long before the sport ever aired. The kind of people who watched Bloodsport and wanted to see it in real life, or played Street Fighter and wondered who would win, a sumo wrestler or a guy who can throw fucking fireballs. Fans who really, passionately cared about what style was the best and were willing to pay for VHS tapes, go to shows, and support the sport in its darkest years. For everything he got wrong with X-Arm, Art Davie really did predict the future of how people would consume combat sports. His idea of a digital age combat sport designed to be watched on a phone, it turns out, was years ahead of its time. Power Slap is basically X-Arm without the arm wrestling, and while its numbers may be dismal on YouTube, Rumble and television, in the dopamine-fueled ADHD world of TikTok, it is blowing the fuck up. The fact that around 86% of slap fights end in a knockout, combined with how savage some of these knockouts are, make it perfect algorithm fodder for people who really don't care about the art portion of martial arts. People who just want to gawp at their phone, their leering faces like a devil sick of sin, and watch another poor bastard do a speed run of brain damage before scrolling to their next spoon feeding from the almighty algorithm. Combat sports have fans, Power Slap has bystanders. Whether it's pit fighting, tethered arm wrestling, or Power Slap, promoters are always looking for the next big thing. Karate Combat has brought back the YAMMA Pit. Fight Circus made car jitsu and phone booth fighting very real things. Dana has given us Hasbullah and the CTE Olympics. So again, I would just like to take this last opportunity to appeal to Art Davie or Bob Meyerowitz. If you're listening, the time has never been more ripe to make Slaughter Sport happen.
Slaughter Sport. 前に三島を継ぐ権利はない。話にならんわ。生まれ変わって出直してこい。見せてもらおうか。話にならんわ。生まれ変わって出直してこい。お前に三島を継ぐ権利はない。出直してこい。